you also felt strongly that branded video will cannibalize television advertising, right?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I think, I mean, Awesomeness TV is a good example on YouTube of where someone's taken the initiative to assemble and kind of aggregate a bunch of audience content that's highly relevant to, you know, and in this case happens to be teens. The viewership through those channels is astounding. So there are producers and publishers inside of that sub-channel on YouTube who have 3 million subscribers, who regularly get audiences that exceed, you know, not just long tail but mid tail cable channels. I think that what we have to, as kind of brand strategists and people who understand a path to a decision, not just a path to purchase, but a path to decision about what content I'm going to consume, back to your point about am I going to flip over to education or am I going to take an entertainment break, we have to find all those friction points today. And so unfortunately a lot of the contingencies around, well, how do we reform our expectations of what video delivers to us and how does that quid pro quo relationship kind of normalize again? A lot of that rests on technology, and I don't think we want to, you know, talk about whether I can, you know, manage the input button on my TV, or how much smarter can those TVs get, or is the problem in resolution, or is the problem in the interface? I think it's the latter. I don't think any of those things, even solved perfectly, would ever compel the next, you know, few generations to reorient back to a standardized, common, single format.
But the reality is that the content owners, the originally scripted television content owners, are monetizing that content online at very high CPMs. I mean, they're taking advantage of digital and its time-delayed viewing capability. And you can't fast forward through the ads. It's like a perfect world for them.
And the trade-off for those high CPMs, and we're more than happy to entertain them, particularly with clients who have a location-based business model, is now I can avoid that waste. Now I can match up viewership and credit card data and see, okay, so I ran in these locations. Did I get higher traffic, and, you know, did my check go up in those locations? And if so, it may well cover the premium.
Well, the argument for the highest CPM is, as you said, is twofold. One is you get better targeting with it than you would with, you know, with linear television, and you get higher engagement. And the CPMs are pretty amazing what they're getting. So where is the loss going to occur for television then? Is it, you know, if the content owners right now are not seeing in total a drop in their ad revenue, right? It continues to climb. And so does video ad revenue. Is video ad revenue pulling money from some other
Well, I think
format?
that's a good question. If you look at it on the consumption side, I think you come to a similar kind of quandary, which is, well, we're just consuming more content. And so what are we doing less of as people? And some of that is we're spending less time at breakfast, or we're spending less time, you know, around the dinner table together. And at a certain point, you reach a threshold of, well, that simply doesn't work anymore. And you and I talked about the potential for some generations, either in the very close term or, you know, not too far out, breaking that model and saying, we want to actually begin to shrink our content consumption. I think on the supply side, the question for me is, does it incrementally evolve or does it break and get rebuilt in a way that, and we think this has been disruptive, we may be in for a much rockier ride.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look at the way that total time spent on the internet has changed over the past 3 years, as I was saying earlier, I mean, it just took off like a rocket ship. And now it's slowed down, but it's still growing, albeit at a slower rate.
Well, and we figured out the deduplication math, But even taking that into account, we've seen this rate of content increase that is really hard to conceive and believe.
The more devices you give somebody, the more ways of accessing content, the more they will use them, right? Which is really interesting. The other thing that on video that floors me is that even with all of the digital video viewing that's happening, if you look at the total time spent, it's only 5% of the time spent watching television. So there's still a huge upside.
A lot of
huge upside. So last question I wanted to ask you, and again, I know you've got a very strong opinion here that I also happen to agree with. You said that branded video is different from a TV commercial, right? You believe
Absolutely.
that, right? So how do you get that video to be played? Give me some of the things that you've learned about what you got to put into that content and the timing of it, and when does a brand name appear?
Sure. I think that last point is the critical one, which is you have to think about the first few seconds. And so understanding format is obviously critical, and I think a couple of folks have made that point really well, which is not just the size of the screen, but what's the context, where are they, what other information can you gather about them. I think on the actual content composition side, I think a big challenge for us together, and that's us working with our creative partners, working with other alternative publishers that may be emerging even in the media space, whether it's on the publisher side or the agency side, and then obviously the brands with their investment dollars. We have to think about modularity of creative. And I think we have to really consider whether or not these 30s are small films anymore. And I know that's a bit of heresy if you've spent your career writing these little brand stories. But the reality is, and you asked the question earlier about, I might be paying by the second of the ad viewed.
Right.
And if that becomes the case, or even in increments of that 30 seconds, I have to be able and willing to swap out the next form of creative. So don't wait till halfway through the 30 to show the brand logo. Hit them up front. Because, as consumers of the content itself, not just of the brands and products, people are becoming more impatient. They want to get to the chase, cut to the chase, and they want to understand what's the benefit of consuming this content, whether it's forced or skippable, right? Those are the trade-offs they're making in much shorter and smaller increments.
There is a trend, though, would you agree, towards shorter and shorter pieces of video from an advertising sense, right?
Sure,
and if you go back 40 years, it used to be you could only run a 1-minute commercial, if I remember correctly, and then it took some legal wrangling with the networks to get down to a 30, and then it went to a 15, and now we're going to 6-second Vine ads.
Right. Well, we did a campaign with one of the Hillshire products that was launching. Limited budget, so we wanted to go right into the aisle. So we made a lot of hay out of the story about working on a beacon campaign. And part of that discussion was, well, what do you want to serve someone when they're in the aisle? Do you want to serve them a quick static brand image? Do you want to serve them a coupon? Or is there some form of video we could serve them? And I think we admitted at that point we weren't ready to bite off that last option. Vines being fun and being used in a lot of really productive ways by a lot of brands, we weren't comfortable yet, given the challenges of that category in that aisle, getting to some kind of norm, or even having just the scale to look at and say, all right, is this a right and effective way to communicate this message?
So we can look forward to more changes as we go forward here with the ad business.
We're redefining what disruption is, I think, right now.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.